Hello everyone, it's George from Ireland. So welcome back to my channel. So the lugubrious forecast I've got to make is that Ukraine is losing this war. Didn't quite say that Ukraine will lose this war, though I think that's actually a probability. Now, it depends on your definition of winning and losing, but President Volodymyr Zelensky has set the bar very high, says he wants to recover all the territory lost since 2014. That includes the Crimean Peninsula. Um, and even when I was optimistic about Ukraine's chances, I didn't see that transpiring. But even to regain the land lost since the 2022 invasion is very unlikely. I remember tomorrow will mark the second anniversary of Russia's illegal war of unprovoked aggression. And a lot of pundits said that Kiev would fall in just 2 days. Western experts said that. Russian state media was constantly harping onto that mantra. And I said 2 weeks. So I was dead wrong. I was actually closer to the mark than most people. Here we are almost 2 years later. They survived that initial blitzkrieg, the Ukrainians. They defeated that. And then they came into attritional warfare. And they managed, obviously, some successful counteroffensive in September 2022. The big one, summer 2023, failed, made minimal ground at quite a high cost. But why I'm increasingly pessimistic for Ukraine is that Western betrayal. They've been let down by Western countries. And other countries like, say, Japan, Singapore, which are not really Western, but still funding them, arming them. He promised them all this military support, and it hasn't been delivered. So they were supposed to get, the European Union was supposed to give Ukraine 1 million shells by this spring. Delivered 300,000 so far, said there'll be actually 500,000 in total that they will deliver. So still far, far short of what they're supposed to do. That's why you look at the Battle of Bakhmut a year ago versus the Battle of Avdiivka this year. Bakhmut, the Russians were fighting there for 8 months. Grueling casualties, tens of thousands killed. Yevgeny Prigozhin said, was it 40,000 Russians killed, mostly in Wagner Private Military Company. The late and unlamented Yevgeny Prigozhin. Some of the people on the Russian side weren't actually Russian. They were people from Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, some guest workers who were strong-armed into joining. People from all sorts of countries, Zambia, even Nepal, who volunteered or cajoled into it. Prison recruits whose lives were frittered away in pointless attacks, just stopping bullets, just drawing enemy fire. But anyway, the Ukrainians were able to inflict very heavy and painful casualties on the Russians. They're inflicting five casualties for every one they lost themselves. So it goes. Bakhmut held out longer than anybody thought possible. The United States advised the Ukrainians to withdraw earlier. The Ukrainians said they're not going to do that because they could bleed Russia white there, and slow them down for elsewhere. So successful, although I suppose it was a technical Russian victory. What was the objective? To take Bakhmut, which they succeeded in doing. But it was a victory of Pyrrhos because the losses sustained were out of all proportion to any strategic gain attained from taking what was then just a pile of rubble. And then come on to the Battle of Avdiivka this year. And rather than lasting 8 months, this one lasted more like 4 months. The Ukrainians were not crowing about delivering mighty strokes of war against Russia. And so the casualty ratio was not so imbalanced. And the Ukrainians are saying, we're firing only one shell for every 10 shells they get. And so it carries on. Now, the Russians, they purchased Shahid Iranian drones, and the Iranians are lying through their teeth saying, we did sell them to Russia, but only before the war began. We stopped afterwards. Remember, Iran is one of only 5 sovereign states in the world to vote for Russia in the United Nations General Assembly in their resolution on Ukraine. The others being the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, commonly called North Korea, Venezuela, Eritrea, and Belarus. So Shahid drones are not terribly good, but they can still kill people and do. So because Russia's military manufacturing was not up to much, but they've expanded it a lot. They're really ramping up production, compulsory weekends. Workers grumble about that, but they are paid on a pro rata basis. They're getting children as young as 14 to work in these factories, and that can count as their education, stuff like that. So, it was kind of expensive for Russia, and the sanctions are only biting a little bit. They managed to evade that with their dark fleet, managing to do payments via CIPS, the Chinese online payment system, trading in yuan, the Chinese currency. Another thing is the sanctions haven't got far enough. There haven't been secondary sanctions sufficiently against China, Uzbekistan, Turkey, the UAE. Armenia, Georgia, any countries which are selling items on dual-use items, things with a military application, electronic components, microprocessors, transponders, and so forth. And often the Ukrainians, they find unexploded Russian missiles, they'll find these Western manufactured items. So that's another reason why Russia is able to prosecute its war. And because by sanctioning another country, you also hurt yourself because you're losing business. What else as I going to say? So so Russia's got a serious and growing advantage, and that 10 shells that they fire for every one Ukrainians fire, that ratio is going to increase to 11 to 1 to 12 to 1 to 13 to 1. I mean, how much longer can it go on for? And so there's obviously got to be some sort of trade-off between land for lives. So yes, the Ukrainians want to defend ground, but it's not worth it if too many guys get killed. So they're going to have to gradually pull back. But then retreat turns into rout. It could be disorderly, and they could lose ground, and the Russians could start to build up some impetus. Moreover, it's really chipping away at Ukrainian morale. They're suffering a lot, and there's no end to this in sight. The Russian population outnumbers almost 4 to 1. The Russians are more successful in recruiting non-Russians, like I said, Tajik and Kyrgyz Gastarbeiterin, who often work in low-paid, dirtier jobs in the remote regions. People from Uzbekistan, less successful people from Armenia and Georgia. Well, there are not so many of them, tend to go to other countries. Kazakhstan is a relatively affluent former Soviet republic, so rather few of them go to work in Russia. So this is why there's also the manpower problem, and the Verkhovna Rada, that's the Ukrainian parliament, refuses to pass this conscription bill, which would widen the net because the parameters are a little bit restricted in terms of age about who can be called up for compulsory military service, exemptions for fathers of over 3 children. I'm not sure if they'd be minor children, medical exemptions, and some people really are incapable of performing military service. Others are able to bribe doctors and have themselves certified permanently medically unfit for military service. They're Ukrainian men who are of military age and fighting fit in Western countries. I know a few of them in London have not gone back. And could Ukraine call them up? But other countries like Germany and Estonia, if you did do that to Ukrainian men in our country, our police, we would not arrest them. We would not enforce this conscription. So, I mean, what if my life were on the line? I wouldn't want to go and get killed. I wouldn't want to go and get wounded, scarred for life, eventually have to have my limbs amputated. Quite apart from any of this happening to me, I wouldn't want to see it happen to my comrades. Wouldn't really want to see it happen to the enemy either. And even if there were no danger, I obviously wouldn't want to live in a freezing trench, which is reeking, and not getting any food for days and all that kind of thing. Wouldn't want to be a soldier even in peacetime. So I can't entirely blame them. The other thing is I say, but it wouldn't make any difference. It'll do no good. We're losing anyway. So there's a sense of inevitability kicking in. So Ukrainian morale hasn't collapsed. I'm just saying it's ebbing away. It may yet collapse. So that there is a significant possibility that Russia will win outright this year. Let's say taking Kiev, give that a 30% chance this year, maybe higher percent chance next year if the war goes all the way through 2025. There are other ways they could win without actually taking Kiev. Is Ukraine de facto or de jure agreeing to cede some of that territory into the east, agreeing never to join NATO and/or the European Union, to bring back Russian as a co-official language, all sorts of things. So that $60 billion that's stuck in the United States Congress. In the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, the Speaker, said it's dead on arrival. So shockingly, some of the Republicans, they are doing Putin's work for him. And if it wasn't for them, Ukraine would have a good chance. And that $60 billion is huge for armaments, but also to pay to sustain the Ukrainian government, to pay salaries, to maintain roads, railways, bridges, tunnels, the electric grid, and so forth. And it's going to be increasingly difficult to actually transport troops and munitions, to provide people electricity. And we're coming out of winter now, but next winter, the prospects are rather bleak. So there's just not enough money forthcoming. The European Union is stepping up funding, but not enough. So that $60 billion, it might never get to Ukraine. I think it will, some money will actually, but it won't be the whole 60 billion, and it won't be for a few weeks yet. I also blame Biden for not doing more to compromise on border security, to doing whatever it takes to keep Ukraine in the fight. Lindsey Graham, one of the honorable Republicans in this one, says it's money well spent because the Ukrainians are fighting, so we don't have to. So consider the prospects of a Putin victory in Ukraine. So even as the whole of Ukraine, he's buoyed up, looking for his next victim. Will they try and take over Moldova? Well, they can't get there unless they get through the whole of Ukraine. Take over more or all of Georgia, forcibly integrate Belarus, and so on. Would he probe the borders of NATO? He's murdered people in NATO countries on many occasions. Russian dissidents, Alexander Litvinenko, that other guy was actually a Georgian citizen in Berlin, Germany. I can't remember his name, who supported Chechen independence and things like that, setting off a bomb in a Slovak weapons warehouse about 10 years ago. There are all sorts of attacks on the internet in Latvia and Lithuania over the past few years, and they'll still they say, NATO is weak-willed. The lesson he learned from Afghanistan is NATO's got no staying power. They weren't willing to have people killed there, and so it's proved in Ukraine that they're too selfish, they're too greedy, they're not willing to fund their allies. They will throw them under a bus. So it's actually quite grim. The thing is, the price paid by the Russian army forces will be high. Already about 90,000 of them killed. Mediazone is able to list over 45,000 of them killed. So many tanks, trucks, artillery pieces destroyed. I know they're manufacturing them like mad, but till they're really beefed up, will take some time. But it's all very worrying. It's all very dispiriting, and actually was all avoidable. I really desperately want to be wrong. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe on Patreon, donate on PayPal. Goodbye.